Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Building Your Desired Customer Experience. My name is Rihanna Collier, and I'm Vice President of the Software and Services Division at SIIA. And I'm delighted to be joined today by John Zook, Principal at Waterstone Management Group. And recently, John's been applying his innovation management experience to expand and deepen Waterstone's capabilities in customer experience. And so we are really lucky to have him here with us today to share some of his insights. Before I turn it over to John, just a little about SIIA, who we are, and some quick housekeeping reminders. If you're not familiar with SIIA, we are a global trade association for the software and digital content industries. We're a membership organization, a corporate membership organization. We have over 750 corporate members. As I mentioned, I run the software and services division within SIIA, and there are many divisions within our organizations. We have an education division, a digital content and media group. We have a Specialized Information Publishers Association, our Financial Information Services Division, and then where we started over 30 years ago still remains is our Public Policy and our Intellectual Property Protection group. So within the organization, all of these divisions serve our members across the organization, and we serve them in a variety of ways. I mentioned IP protection, the advocacy side, but also the business development, professional development, networking, and education opportunities. And this next slide I'm going to show you actually represents just the software and services division, but most of what you see here does occur across all of our divisions. And these are just opportunities and areas where many of our members get involved in the activities and the initiatives that the SIIA puts forth. So from our different awards programs to our communities, our marketing support, our events, and whether that be speaking, sponsoring, attending, our market research that's available to our members, our virtual activities, our thought leadership opportunities, and again, we have multiple boards that really govern who we are and the type of content that we produce. And you'll get a taste of that today with today's webinar. Just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of our 2016 event calendar, and this was primarily in-person events. This does not include any of our webinars and other smaller activities, but just wanted to give you a snapshot of the types of events and activities that occurred this year. And we're just working on the 2017 calendar now, which will be circulating out to the world very shortly. And we hope that all of you will take a look at that and reach out to us if there's areas and opportunities where you might want to get involved. My contact details are there on the screen, as well as my team members. And John will share his later as well, I'm sure. But again, we are a membership organization. Waterstone Management Group has been a member of SIIA for a while now. We've done a lot of valuable activities and content with them. So I hope you'll enjoy what you hear today. If you have any interest in getting further involved within SIIA, please let me know. I'm happy to have a chat with you just to see if there are some areas, some synergies between what you guys are trying to achieve within your companies and some of the stuff we're doing here at SIIA. So with that, just a couple of quick housekeeping reminders. All phone lines are set on mute. So we're going to ask that all questions be asked through the chat box. You will the webinar today is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording and the presentation. I know we get a lot of questions about that. But again, we do want to take your questions throughout. So use the chat box on the bottom left of your screen. Don't wait for John to open it up for questions. Go ahead and submit your questions as they come to you during or throughout the presentation, and we'll certainly get to those and have John touch on all the questions at the end. If for some reason we run out of time and we don't get to your question, we will address it directly with you offline. So don't worry about that. With that, I do want to go ahead and turn it over to John. Again, we have John Zook, who's a principal with Waterstone Management Group here, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about the pitfalls and the accelerators and how to really build your desired customer experience, because that's what it's all about today is really our customers. So John, I'll let you take it from there.
Super. Thanks, Brianna. And good morning and good afternoon to folks. Thanks for taking some time out to discuss this topic with us today. Excited about it, particularly because as Brianna had mentioned, and what really informed the title here was that Waterstone, with several of my Waterstone colleagues, have had a chance over the course of the last actually several years now to work with a number of clients across a range of industries around the topic of customer success, customer experience, because of a number of drivers, and we'll touch on those in a moment. But very excited to share some of the observations we've now been able to glean out of those engagements and start to share some of that in the form of, again, it's this sort of idea of pitfalls and accelerators. So hopefully that resonates with folks. And again, as we go through, feel free to leverage the chat box. We'll also try and mix it up a little bit with doing some real-time polling. So apologies to those who are trying to multiplex and do other things. We're going to ask for your attention here for the next 40 minutes or so. So moving forward, just a quick highlight on our firm. We are a boutique consultancy that focuses exclusively on tech and services. Because we work in areas that range from strategy through implementation, we really have great visibility across a range of topics, and levels of depth within enterprises, within markets and industries, particularly as it pertains to key disruptive capabilities like moves to the cloud, like moves to subscription. And so we're using that as the catalyst, particularly around the subscription migration for many industries and many enterprises. We've had that, again, a pretty measured focus and a growing practice area recently around journey mapping and designing of the customer experience, helping organizations charter their customer success teams, aligning in the new organization and understanding what the implications are there and the ramifications and implications to operating model and business model, helping with ROI and business justification for organizations, for the associated technology and so on, and then working through a technology roadmap. So again, just to say from an experience and opportunity standpoint, we've had pretty rich set of experiences, again, over the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, that allow us to really inform how we go about sharing this information and codifying it for folks. That said, there's a limit to the scope and context of what we can cover in a 40 or 50-minute webinar. So I'd like to encourage people, if there are topics here that are adjacent but not really directly hitting areas of concern or question that you have, by all means feel free to reach out either through Rihanna or directly. We have contact info here in the webinar, and would love to engage in that conversation because it's definitely an area that personally I'm certainly interested and passionate about, as well as several of my colleagues at Waterstone. With that, let's get into it. So the premise and what we, I think, had floated initially to hopefully what was the instigation for people to join us on the call was this idea that many companies have taken the steps to define a journey. Whether it's through journey mapping or other tools and mechanisms to do process mapping or customer experience design, so there's an aspirational element to what they want their customer experience to be, but often what we see is that there are significant gaps between what it is today and what we want that to be experienced, or where we want that to be experienced. And so with that, I wanted to, this is one of the opportunities for the little bit of a poll here that I hope you'll participate in. So what I'd like to do is, we have a couple of dozen folks on the call actually. I'd love to, if you could interactively through your chat, just answer the first question with a Y or an N or a yes or a no if you've actually done customer journey mapping within your organization, and just so that we can get a sense for within the group that's on the call now, how many of you have done that. It is a popular topic in an area that a lot of folks have worked. but we are seeing that some have done it, but some have not actually. So that's very helpful. I think for the people that have done it, what we'd like to do is understand if, as part of that, if you've been how successful, maybe on a scale of say 1 to 10, how you feel that you've been successful in actually implementing and making some of the executional changes, operational changes that are needed to really implement that or realize that customer experience. So we'll just give folks a moment to. I appreciate the real-time input, and so again, for looking now for so got a couple of low scores, a couple of medium scores, which again presumably would link to why you're participating in the call this morning. So so thank you for the interactive feedback. So let's move forward then. And given that, I think and by the way, again the reaction that folks have had on the call is in fact directly correlated to what we were trying to cover. So as we talk through this morning, main topics that we're going to look at are, first, why journey mapping is critical to defining that customer experience and helping you get that as is and to be view. And I think particularly for the folks that have not yet engaged in journey mapping, hopefully that will be an appropriate element to help you make the case as you look to focus attention on that element of the work. The next would be the 5 key focus areas that we've observed. And it's not to say that this is the only 5 or the most important 5, frankly, but just 5 that were very top of mind and very consistent, and we'll talk about those, some specifics of those as we get more into the discussion. But areas that where, when building the structure and capabilities, you really need to focus on. Next is the pitfalls that folks face when they're seeking to operationalize their desired customer experience. And then finally, again, the accelerators. And we'll do a little bit of compare and contrast because there is definitely obviously correlation between some of the pitfalls and then how to mitigate them. So we'll talk about those actually pretty interactively. With that, let's move forward. So I think as you look at this slide in particular, one of the first things that I'd ask people to maybe take away, and one of the most important takeaways from the discussion today would be that journey mapping is, in our perspective, positioned relative to operational changes that you want to drive in your organization. So the journey map, as you see it depicted here, is one of a series of steps, is one milestone, if you will, in a series of steps that an organization or an enterprise would undertake to redesign the customer experience. And so while the journey map is an important tool, it in and of itself is not the be-all, end-all. And so what you see in the depiction here is in that illustration is a journey map. It has a life cycle along the top in those blue chevrons. It starts with buy. It doesn't need to start with buy. You can move upstream a little bit into some of the awareness. But for the most part, they tend to follow that life cycle flow. And then what's depicted underneath that journey map picture here are what we call the moments of truth, or the key areas where a customer and the enterprise interact, and there's a touch point. There's an opportunity to engage around the interaction, around the experience, around the emotion very often. And there are opportunities to take journey maps to really explore and exploit the emotional aspects of the customer experience. There are opportunities to explore and exploit the user experience in a very real way. All of those are useful sort of derivatives or application areas of a journey map. But those are really outside of the bounds of what we're talking about in the way that we like to use it and the way that we're talking about it in today's context, which is around a tool to help inform operational imperatives and ultimately operational and business model changes for an enterprise. So just wanted to make that clear up front because there's a fair amount of, more than a fair amount, there's an overabundance of discussion in the business literature around what journey mapping is, what it can be, how it can be used, and there are a lot of great opportunities to explore journey mapping as a tool for different purposes. I want to make sure that we're grounded on the way that we're looking to use journey mapping in the context of driving operational change. So with that, again, let's look then as what's the rest of the path here then. Once the journey map is defined, how do we then move forward and then start to inform operational imperatives? And that next step is where we're basically saying once we've defined the to-be state for our customer experience, the desired end state, we're now starting to pivot and say, what does it take to get there? And what you see in this middle illustration is an example of what might be, let's say, as we designed our as-is and our to-be journey maps, we might have identified gaps. Maybe one of the gaps that's very common today, particularly for cloud providers and software providers, is around the demo experience and the opportunity to try and buy before a customer commits to a long-term contract. And so here you see an example of a team that was formed, the Demo and Show Success, or the DAZZLE team, if you will. Pardon the little pun there on the acronym. And this is a tool that we found is useful to basically give a snapshot of, hey, what's the next 30 days look like in terms of what are the activities, what are the main milestones, what are the things that we don't know that we need to learn, right? So maybe experiments that we're going to run in the next 30 days to help inform and guide this team as they progress forward. And so this is an example of tools and practices that would come up out of the journey mapping gap identification and start to frame and inform, again, what we're using the term operational imperative, but it's really initiatives, if you will. It's work to be done to move the enterprise and advance the customer experience from the current state to the desired state. And if you think about those individual imperatives or those groups of imperatives, and there would be a number of them, some of them would be directed specifically at an area within the life cycle. So in this case, this is a demo, and this would be something that's very much focused on the upfront buying and awareness stages of the life cycle. There might be some operational imperatives that are focused on support and perhaps better enabling self-service and self-support. So you can imagine some of those that are very specific to a phase in the life cycle. You can also envision operational imperatives that would be more foundational and more horizontal across the entire journey map. Those might involve things around training, around education, and those could be for customers. They could also be for internal constituents and stakeholders, and making sure that employees are aware of the shift and the focus on the customer journey. So that mix of operational imperatives would all be codified and would be managed, and then is what brings us to then the next step here that we depict as the chartering of key initiatives, where here the illustration shows across the life cycle the series of initiatives or imperatives that are being staged and the sequencing of them. Because as you can imagine, because this is a bit of a systems problem, right? There are a number of initiatives there that are being launched. There is some complexity to the nature of the integration and the dependency and codependency across the initiatives, that you really start to apply some fundamental project management and program management discipline to make sure that you're staging and sequencing, you're resourcing these initiatives with the proper level of resource so they can be successful, and that you're understanding the dependencies so that as these teams are working and as they're uncovering what is going to be inherently very cross-functional issues or challenges or requirements that they have, that you have the broader enterprise in a position to be able to react and support those initiatives and be able to, whether it's changes to organizational governance, whether it's changes to measures and metrics, changes to processes, changes to systems, those changes that are being asked and being deployed in support of the new customer experience, that they can be properly resourced and they can be properly executed. So that's the staging and the phasing. What we'll do is, with that as a backdrop, we'll now start to really shift attention and start to look at the 5 areas that we are suggesting would be some key focus areas to look at. As we move to that, I do want to take a pause and make sure that If there are questions that folks have, if there are any other clarifying questions or deeper specific context questions, by all means feel free to add them into the chat box. I am glancing at that as we go along, and so I can certainly address some of them along the way, and then others when we get to Q&A at the end, we can cover them. Okay, so the 5 focus areas. Let's start with the first one, which is role definition. Customer experience is a team sport, and it by all means requires clarity and alignment along all of the customer-facing roles. So role definition is consistently, in fact, when I did a little poll internally with some clients and with some colleagues as I was preparing this webinar, and asked, okay, give me your top 3 kind of areas to focus on. Role definition consistently came out to be on top, which is why I actually positioned it as the first one. The second is around segmentation. A cardinal rule in customer success is to treat different customers differently. And so when we think about segmentation, the considerations here is to make sure that segmentation is something that is considered as somewhat dynamic, and so to the extent that as the enterprise evolves, as the customer success organization and the processes evolve, while you don't want to be changing your segmentation up every 6 months or a year, you do want to make sure that as your market is shifting, as your customer base is shifting, and as you as an enterprise, you and your enterprise are shifting, that you're refreshing the view of segmentation and understanding how it's aligning to help you serve those different customers in different ways. Next, scale consideration. So segmentation is certainly one key enabler to scale, but beyond that, again, I mentioned earlier, I think this idea that customer experience, as I look at it, is a bit of a complex system. It's not a program. It's not dependent on a single function. And so you really need to bring systems thinking into it, and this idea of structuring pilots and trying nimble approaches to things to be able to understand what's working and what's not. We'll talk about that in a few different contexts as we go through, but I think one of the key takeaways here is I would challenge people to think about customer success in that systems context and start to apply some of the tools and techniques that we have from innovation and product and software development into this context. The fourth one is technology, and the good news is there are some great options for technologies to support customer success and improving the customer experience and monitoring and reacting to it. The reality is, technology, as with other technologies and systems, it's an investment. Not only the cost of the tools themselves, but the investment in the organization and the training and the changes that have to go along with using and successfully adopting those tools to drive adoption of your tools. And so it's really essential that organizations understand what those investments are, and that they look across the organization and understand that as they make a business case to support those or inform those investment decisions, that they're factoring all of the things that need to be considered. Lastly, and not fifth because it's least important, but just because somebody's got to go fifth, is the fact that there are measures, and in some ways you think about this as maybe a foundational element, so it's on the bottom, of making sure that there's a balance of financial measures, operational measures, and I would say, again, just because of the nature of what we're working with in here in customer experience, there in fact can be behavioral measures as well. And those behavioral measures can be applied to the organization to see how over time the organization is maybe improving their empathy with the customer and understanding of the customer experience. There can also, of course, be behavioral measures with the customers that you can apply and metrics that we can apply and expectations that we would have of how we want to move our customer base. So again, with those 5 set out, hopefully that sets a good canvas for folks to now start to then apply the pitfalls and accelerators that we've seen in practice. So let's start with the first one around role definition. Some of the pitfalls that we see here, this first bullet, loosely defined or an unclear RACI, RACI being, of course, the responsibility, accountability, consulted or informed, that classic sort of matrices, the old school tools for mapping who's doing what, if you will, right? And the lack of that clarity for how customer experience is managed through the life cycle. And I think about the fact that there's a saying around that sometimes the hardest things are the least complicated. And in some ways, I think myself and several of my colleagues continue to be amazed at how often enterprises really struggle with just even the first two, if you just forget about racing, but just responsibility and accountability. And you think about the basic of that customer journey map that I showed on a few slides earlier in the life cycle phases, the idea of having clarity around who is responsible and accountable for the customer across each of those chevrons, and not only within the chevron, but again, particularly across the chevrons, right? So when we move from the awareness to buy stage, or from buy to implementation, who's handling those transitions? How are they being handled? And along the way, are we communicating to the customer what their expectations should be for who's going to be interacting with them, and maybe who won't be interacting with them anymore, right? The next item here around customer success managers. And customer success is still a relatively nascent entity, and many times organizations struggle with how to form up a customer success team. There's certainly, because of the increased awareness of customer success and the demand for customer success managers in the marketplace, sometimes it's a challenge to find resources. And so we see often that just the nature of sometimes the roles that get defined and the people that get put in those roles with lack of clarity can sometimes lead to customer success managers, instead of having them focus on adoption and retention, they fall back to more tactical or short-term firefighting kinds of activities around being more of effectively maybe an escalation manager or a support function. And so that sets a tone, unfortunately, across the organization that can really erode the effectiveness, the long-term effectiveness and the capability of the customer success function. And it can be a real pitfall, because you wind up effectively having to kind of recast or reconstitute the success role within the organization to be able to kind of restart it. And then lastly, this idea of failing to leverage a full team. I said before that customer success is very important to have alignment around the customer-facing roles. But the reality is that as customer experience and customer success is really a team sport, there are functions and there are participants within the organization and across the organization that can really help to improve the experience. So leveraging executives who may or may not on a natural course of their day be customer-facing, but using their expertise and their guidance, leveraging, say, developers and development team in ways to perhaps participate in customer forums, and using their expertise in knowledge bases and so on to really improve the experience and let them share their guidance and knowledge. So leveraging that full team and bringing that to bear in improving the customer experience is something that we definitely see as sometimes areas where companies just have a struggle. On the accelerator side, there are definitely a few here to exploit. The first being that customers, particularly I think because of the way that our consumer experiences with a lot of great customer experience enterprises has really influenced our expectation for business relationships. I think customers appreciate when an enterprise or a partner comes to them and says, hey, as a customer, here's the journey I have planned for you, right? So you might be using enterprise software in a way for your job that is related to maybe if you think of a Salesforce or a CRM system, or something in an HR management system to keep your time and schedule your time. Regardless of that purpose or that function, the idea that as you interact with that application, the provider of that application would share with you and say, hey, I understand as a user this is what you're looking for out of our application. I understand as a user that there might be areas along the way that you're going to struggle with, and I want to let you know that users like you that we've worked with have found success by doing the following step, by taking the following steps, A, B, or C, by perhaps at a certain stage in the experience, in our interaction, our relationship, maybe taking some training and taking a half hour to watch a video, or taking time to participate in a local group interaction at a community activity, or coming to one of our conferences, but actually laying that out and setting that expectation up front. I think customers really respect that and frankly have come to expect it as part of a relationship with a long-term enterprise and a customer experience. I think the other area that there's an opportunity for is really positioning the customer success manager as the owner of adoption and retention. And consistently where we've seen success is making sure, again, as a mitigation to those pitfalls of having customer success teams get into more short-term tactical things, is frankly making sure they have a full plate of adoption and retention activities and communicating to the organization that that is their focus, putting the metrics in place to make sure that it reinforces those behaviors and really drive the entire organization to embrace customer success and customer experience through those success managers. So hopefully these pitfalls and accelerators you'll find helpful as you move through and address some of perhaps some of the challenges that you have in role definition. Let's move then to segmentation. And on the pitfall side, I think most recurring issue that we see here is that there's complex segmentation criteria. If you can't explain the way you're segmenting your customers to maybe your friend's child, maybe they don't need to be 6 years old, but at least a teenager, in simple terms, then you've got something that's too complex. So having something that's simple, having something that's robust, and then the second point of not sticking to the rules, I think consistently what we find is as we go in, and often we're asked to not only help define segmentation, but often we're helping to refine segmentation. What we'll find is in doing some upfront due diligence that the organization will have a stated segmentation policy, and then when you get in and start talking to either sales teams or market-facing teams or customer success teams and say, well, okay, give me some examples of how for this segment you're treating these customers, and show me for these 5 customers that are supposed to be in this segment what you've been doing, what you find is that, in fact, those customers, even though they're assigned a certain segment, the way that they're being treated is not consistent with the rules and the criteria that we've set up for those segments. So because perhaps maybe they're getting special treatment because they had an issue with the product, and so the customer executive said that, well, let's give them some extra love in the short term. Okay, that's fine. But what are we doing systematically to make sure that we're in fact trying to have a little more discipline around where those customers fall in the segments and making sure that all of the customers within the defined segment get the same treatment, and we have consistency and systematic application of the kinds of programs and the kinds of activities that we're doing so that we can measure the impact and we can measure the results and we can influence changes that we want to do going forward to maybe change the way that we're handling those segments. So it's very important to stick to the rules so that you can apply a systematic set of approaches and analytics and so on into those segments and be able to inform decision making going forward. On the accelerator side, the reality is, as I mentioned, segmentation is very much a dynamic issue, and so it's rare that you get to have a complete refresh of your customer base and just kind of throw things up, right? So customers at some point in time are assigned into a segment, and they have a certain set of interactions with you based on the segmentation that you've applied. And so what often happens is over time, you'll have a customer that perhaps early in the life cycle might be a high-growth customer. They might be in a segment that identifies them internally as a customer that gets a lot of attention from your support organization or from your senior executive team and so on. And over the course of that relationship, it might actually come to be where that organization or that enterprise that your customer, that they reach a bit of a plateau, and maybe they're not growing their licenses as much. they're using the tool, they're adopting it, they're continuing to grow with new releases and so on, but they don't necessarily have the same needs or frankly merit the same level of attention. And so they're maybe going to shift down in segmentation. They're going to move to a segment that they get a little bit less attention, but or sort of a white glove care. So the fact that they're going to move down, while it might be perceived as a negative, the reality is that organization might in fact appreciate that, right? They might understand the fact that, hey, the relationship with your tool and with your product at that point in time is in a bit of a plateau stage. And so to the extent that they don't need that level of attention, they can focus on other things, they respect that. And so having that candid conversation, having that reset of expectations and the clarity of expectations is important. The complement to that is, of course, the customer that maybe is starting to have an uptick or maybe merits a shift in segmentation and a shift in attention. Maybe they've made an acquisition, and that as a result of that acquisition, they're going to be buying a number of new licenses, and they're going to need to take some activities that will get them more attention and more care. Maybe they have some integration opportunities going forward, again, either as a result of reorg or growth or changes that will allow you to engage in a conversation with them. So I often coach clients to look at changes in segmentation as opportunities to call, so to speak, or opportunities to engage in conversation and have that candid dialogue with your key constituents within the customer base. And again, have the frank discussion and use that to inform a mutually understood set of expectations around where they are in the segments and what the relationship and what the experience should be going forward. So that's for segmentation. Let's move forward then to scale considerations. Here, we're talking about this idea of customer success as a bit of a systems opportunity. And so pitfalls here is, frankly, failing. The first is failing to execute on your segmentation, right? So not treating different customers differently. The second one is around over-engineering the one-to-many or tech-touch campaigns. And as you think about customer success, and again, I mentioned that we work with organizations often on building out their customer success teams, there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of conversation in the industry about what should be coverage models and what are ratios for different customer success managers in different industries, given different customer dynamics and market dynamics. And so there's these discussions of, is it, for high touch, white glove, is it 1 to 10, 1 to 50? Then as you get into more mainstream kind of coverage models, 1 to 250, 1 to 300. As you get to this, tech touch or one-to-many, there's the ratios become, they're sort of, it's inappropriate, frankly, I think, to talk about it in ratios, right? Of 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 10,000. A customer success manager can't drive to work in the morning and say, "Gosh, how am I going to engage with my 10,000 customers today?" It's not so much about that kind of engagement. It's again more about leveraging the enterprise and leveraging more of a campaign management. And I think that's where, as you bring in resources into those kinds of roles, playing off of market, people that have skill sets that are used to doing market and campaign management kinds of activities, that are used to doing dynamic outbound experiments, if you will, with sending out information, sending out videos, working collaboratively with people in the support organization to understand where are we seeing problems with the product, where are we seeing customers calling in, and then crafting outbound messages as a reaction to that to try and be proactive about opportunities to inform tool usage, to be able to inform and drive customers towards certain areas of either new features that aren't being adopted or new features that are being adopted and should be exploited more broadly. So having that, again, it's a systems mentality, it's an experimentation kind of mentality. Having that perspective towards that goes a long way in mitigating that pitfall. So in fact, as we talk about that on the accelerator side, this idea of the first bullet here of designing and executing in-market testing, this idea of for those tech-touch customer success managers to really be employing a campaign methodology, A/B test, and constant dynamic testing kind of mindset is really is really essential, I should say, for long-term success. the systematic use of playbooks and this idea of, particularly for scale, idea of consistency and uniformity, it also gets, I think, to an important other element here is, frankly, we do see a lot of there's a lot of churn in customer success organizations, and because it is a high growth area, it's an area where you need to think about implementing processes and practices in a way that are robust, that are going to stay in your organization, so they're not customer success manager dependent. And so the idea of having documented playbooks, of having those practices in a form so that they can be shared and leveraged is really important. And then lastly, this idea of treating customer success with a product and service paradigm, the idea that you actually should have a roadmap associated with your customer success program. And think about where your success managers are, where your skills and capabilities are at a given point in time, and how you want to see that evolve, and how you want to see the capabilities evolve of your people and therefore of the organization as a whole. And really, again, adopting that approach and then applying that to the way that you're making decisions and executing on those. Okay, that's on scale. Two more remaining, right? So first is technology. Let's talk about some of the pitfalls there. I think the biggest area that we've seen is that because of the inextricable linkage between customer success platforms and a customer success organization, very often when companies look at trying to justify investments of technology, they'll start to look and say, well, okay, how is this enabling my CSMs? What is this doing specifically on, yes, there's presumably areas on churn or on upticks in adoption and expansion and cross-sell and upsell. You can make those assumptions. You can use that to justify the technology, but very often that is a myopic view, and it, frankly, given the nature of what the real costs of some of these technology implementations are, it might not allow you to kind of close the books, if you will, or make the numbers to be able to properly justify this investment. And so what we see on the other side is, from an accelerator standpoint, is a true ROI-centered analysis that takes a look at things from a broader functional perspective, understanding what benefits are coming to the sales team, understanding what benefits are coming to the marketing team, and being able to really leverage and codify those impacts and benefits. So for instance, because a customer success manager is getting this great feedback on what's being used and what's not being used in the product and being able to drive that back to product development, that provides for more efficient and more effective future releases in the product. Working collaboratively with support and being able to understand early some of the patterns of incoming calls and incoming issues and challenges, and then being able to design outbound campaigns to mitigate those as a way of deflecting support calls, as a way of reducing overall burden on support. Also looking at correlations between the way that certain campaigns are run or certain benefits are positioned and seeing upsell, and being able to use that information and communicating it back to your sales force to understand, hey, for customers or personas in these markets or in these segments, these are the kinds of value propositions that really resonate with those customers. So when you're doing your outbound calls, when you're doing your calls on those customers, make sure you're touching on those. Let's make sure you have case studies that emphasize what that value proposition is as a way of improving your sales numbers, right? So all of those are benefits that should be included because those are the insights and the information that come from these technology investments. So you want to make sure that you're codifying those and considering them. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about measures. And here, I think the biggest pitfall that we see consistently is over-instrumentation. And similar idea to the segmentation rule of thumb, it's way too easy to get into complex measures and confounding metrics and things of that sort. I'm a big fan of kind of keeping things simple, getting to one-pagers or simple dashboards that can effectively communicate information. Within that, however, it is important to have a robust set. So I think this idea of understanding what some of the core enterprise objectives are and then cascading those objectives down into metrics and specifically tying those metrics to the customer experience. Here's where the journey map comes in handy, right? Here's where the journey map serves as our compass for being able to tie to those metrics. So we can say, for instance, if we're talking about improving a certain dimension of support and being able to differentiate ourselves in the way that we handle certain elements of our relationship with the customer and support, and that's important for the teams within that functional area. How do we cascade that down to understand the moments of truth that we specifically want to impact, and how do we bring out the journey map elements and use those as a way to really illuminate what the key changes are going to be for the customer, and then put in place measures, whether they are a set of financial measures showing that we'll have increased maybe uptake on support capabilities, or operational measures that reduce the cost of support, or behavioral measures that say, gosh, we're seeing better overall kind of mood meter or report card kind of scores from customers around the nature of the way support is being handled, or the ability for them to solve problems on their own, whereas previously maybe that was an area that was constantly cited as a deficiency, and now customers are maybe holding that up as an area where we are an example. So those would be examples of areas across the function, and then within a function where you want to be setting measures that are going to drive behavior that is explicitly tied to the important elements of the customer experience. Okay, so we've talked through the use of the journey map in the context of setting out operational imperatives and driving to operational change. We've talked about some of the 5 key areas that we can work through with regards to accelerators and pitfalls to focus on as you're migrating from designing the to-be experience and operationalizing that to-be experience. Let's talk then a little bit in a recap mode before we open up the phone lines to what are some of the top takeaways here. So first is you want to define that desired experience in both an ideal end-to-end journey, and then also get into the specific moments of truth that then are ways to say what are the areas that we want to make sure that from an operational standpoint we need to focus on within the enterprise to deliver on that desired customer experience. Next is follow that roadmap to close the gaps between your as-is and to-be, right? Prioritize those. You can get, very often internally, there will be ways to get some sense for relative importance of what those imperatives need to be. Sometimes there are real implications around where you have resources available or not, or where you don't have resources available, where there might be other systems changes taking place that frankly might be a higher priority that in the short term that needs you to kind of shift attention to different areas across the organization. So each company is different in how they look at those operational imperatives, how they set the relative importance. I do want to emphasize that, of course, it's important to exploit opportunities to talk to customers and understand from their standpoint what the relative importance is across the journey. So, for instance, in a journey map, you might have, again, as the illustrative map that we showed had about 16 or 18 of those moments of truth depicted across the customer journey. If you ask customers to give their perspective on those, they might say that they resonate with all 16 or 18. However, different customers will have different perspectives on which ones might be more or less important. Now, of course, that's going to be biased based on maybe where they are in their journey with you, but it's important sometimes to poll customers and understand on a relative basis what are some of the hot buttons or hot areas that you need to focus on. So it's very important to get that input both internally and externally on a regular basis. Next, use those 5 areas that we talked about to really start to drive success. And then avoid the pitfalls where you can. I think hopefully the areas that we cited here would be pitfalls that you've either seen or could see yourself running into. And hopefully the accelerators that we've cited there can help to mitigate those, and furthermore can help to in fact drive some results even more quickly than if they were not used. So with that, let's let's see, we'll move to, I'll put the last placeholder slide up. And I think, Rihanna, maybe it's a good time to open the lines here and we can have some Q&A.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left. So I have a few questions for you, John. So how do you view customer experience versus user experience? And actually that question is pretty timely because I'm getting ready to put together a session on user experience. And a lot of the discussion was around how it's completely different than customer experience. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, good question. I think, and again, there are, so I think in a nutshell, right, when we think about customer experience, we're really thinking broadly about different personas that come up in the context of a relationship between the provider and the customer, right? So take the example of a typical enterprise software. There will be end users of a product. So I mentioned earlier like a timekeeping and scheduling application provider. So you've got the end users who are actually using the software in a given day. They're coming into work. They're maybe clocking in, clocking out, and so on. If they're hourly or if they're managed users, they're scheduling time and interacting for hours and time off. That's one base of users, and that user experience, when you think about the application and the design of the tool, the design of the features, the way that the tool is used maybe in a desktop setting versus on an iPad or a mobile setting, all of those considerations are really directed at that user. When we think about customers, though, it's a broader perspective, right? Because while that user experience is very important, quite frankly, very often the user is not the person that's influencing the purchase decision of the application itself. They're not influencing the day-to-day administration of the tool and the management of the tool. And frankly, very often they're not the ones, in fact, they probably aren't the ones that are responsible for sort of the ROI on that tool being able to support the broader business goals of the enterprise, right? So when we think about the customer experience, that's really taking into account not only that user experience, but it's also looking at, for instance, in the enterprise application software example, it's the admin and the set of admins that are administering that tool. It's the support organization, because very often companies might have to staff level 1 support within their own organization, right, to be able to provide support. It's the business owner who is the functional owner. In this case, it might be the HR person in that company who ultimately is on the hook for making sure that that application is delivering on the goals and objectives that the organization has. For being able to support its resources, right, and support its staff, and not only have a timely administration of timekeeping and scheduling and so on, but also then all of the other associated functions around payroll, around benefits, and around all of those things, right? So in the context of that business owner's kind of responsibilities and opportunities as they see it, as in their function, being able to make sure that those considerations are being factored in, and their experience, if you will, is one that it meets with their expectations. So, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it did. So I have another question here, actually more your comments. It says, on top of your 5 key topics, it's also essential to address 2 initial points. First, educate the whole company on what customer success is, starting with the exec team, of course, and then the second is assigning the customer success transformation to a top exec as kind of a number 1 mission. Can you comment on that, on those 2 thoughts?
Yeah, so I think first off, and actually I'll extend because I see there was a question also that came in around how should the customer journey map be shared outside of the organization? Should it be shared with customers? So definitely have a perspective on that. First off, in terms of the use within the executive team, it's interesting. We've seen journey mapping go built out from 2 approaches. One, very much top-down, where executives have engaged with us or with other folks to kind of build out the desired, the to-be state. It's been informed by customers and focus groups and other things, but for the most part, it's a top-down exercise. Others have engaged more of a bottoms-up, frankly, where they've kind of plucked out key folks from across the different functions and done more of a cross-functional and work session over a series of iterations to get that input and to formulate it, and then either directly along the way, having customer input, or validating it afterwards. There's a couple different approaches there. But I will say, candidly, both work. We've done a fair number of both. So we've got enough data to have a statistically, I think, significant perspective, and both work. It really is one of those things where it's the classic consultant's answer of it depends. It depends on where the organization is. It depends on kind of, frankly, the sentiment and the overall culture. If organizations tend to rely more on top-down or, frankly, embrace that openly, then that can work. Very often, though, if I were to choose, I sort of like the bottoms-up cross-functional approach. I find that I think has a longer enduring stickiness. I will also then do a little adjunct to that in terms of this idea of once you have the journey map. We've been with I'd say very strong success, worked with clients to actually have their sales teams and some of their marketing teams actually engage with clients and use the journey map as something that they take out to their key customers. And in the same way, often that companies will go out to particularly strategic customers and have a discussion around, hey, here's the roadmap for our products or for our services. They're now also encompassing customer success and customer journey discussions in that to say, hey, again, for customers like you, let's talk a little bit about what your path should be with us from a customer journey standpoint. Let's understand, and that can be very tactical to understand, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, when we're in implementation today, you're working a lot with our services team. At the completion of that implementation, that services team is going to hand off to a customer success manager. I'm going to introduce you to who that person is. They're not going to have a big role right now during implementation, but later on as we move to more of a steady state and you're onboarded, that customer success manager is going to be your go-to person. And the salesperson that originally sold you this product and the implementation team that's working with you now to put it in place, those teams are going to step back. Right? And they're not going to have as much of an interactive role with you going forward. And having that communication up front, setting that expectation around roles and responsibility, I think customers, again, they come to expect that. They understand, particularly for complex systems that are being implemented, that there's not going to be as much as we'd love to say there's one throat to choke and one person to go to, the reality is these are complex things and they require multiple people, multiple functions. And so having clarity around who I go to for what is a good thing, and it's not a bad thing that who I go to might involve having some multiple stakeholders involved.
John, thank you so much. We are at the top of the hour, so I want to thank John. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If we didn't get to your questions, we will address them offline. And again, the webinar has been recorded. We will share the presentation along with the recording with you. Feel free to circulate to your teams and reach out to John if you have any questions or any follow-up and want to pick his brain a little bit further. I'm sure he'd be glad to. So, John, thank you again for your time today, and I wish everybody a good rest of your day.